Hello everyone, my name's FlareBlitzed and welcome to Eislyn's Apocalypse, a visual novel for the NaNoRenO 2020 Jam, which also has some horror elements and fantasy ones as well mixed in the bag. Let's start this adventure and see how apocalyptic this adventure is. Scene, Hunch, POV, jarred. Okay. There was something about a Memora. Even though it was a large city, it seemed to have the same atmosphere as a small town, where everyone knew each other and nothing bad happened. Really now? It was almost as if it had a soul of its own that connected everyone, and pleaded peace and harmony. It was the perfect place for Jared Varden to raise his family. He happily moved to the city of his wife's childhood to raise their daughter in such a happy and safe environment. But when a series of murders take place, murders of children no less, he felt betrayed. Perhaps he had grown too optimistic, but in the back of his mind he had begun to believe it wasn't possible for people that lived here to be cruel. That may have come from living in a place where most of his cases as a private investigator were resolved as simple misunderstandings for so long. Irregardless of feelings, though, a friend of his daughter's had been murdered, and the killings hadn't stopped there. Jared felt like he had to do something. Jared stared down at the card in his hand as he walked. Was it like a tarot card? Oh, it's an ID card, okie dokie. It was an ID card, one that held the name Thomas Vines, a forgery he had been given that would allow him access to the steelworks factory he was on his way towards. The card had been given to him by someone else who was trying to stop the silent killings. So basically COVID-19 then. A member of a small group of people comprised of reporters, private investigators, parents, and concerned citizens who had also been looking into the mysterious chain of events. Looking for leads, a motive. In this city where murders were extremely rare, these dark and well-concealed crimes stood out. Because yes, even though children have been turning up dead and mutilated according to some witnesses, there was no evidence to be gathered. Somehow, in the time between a witness finding a phone and calling the police and then returning to the corpse always disappeared. Maybe someone should always be watching over the corpse, even though that sounds like a very, very dark thing to withstand without emotionally growing insane. Someone was cleaning up what few bodies had been sighted quickly and efficiently before the police were ever able to arrive. It was a mystery. As for Jared, after a good deal of research, he suspected two people. One was Miss Nightingale, who was in charge of Nightingale Orphanage. Most of the children who had gone missing had been from that orphanage. This was true right up until people started to realise that children weren't just going missing, but being killed. After that, the circle widened to children that lived near the orphanage. The other person he suspected was Mr. Parth Thorndyke. This one was a bit more of a stretch, but Mr. Thorndyke was one of the richest people in the city of Memora, and he had earned a good deal of that money before he moved here. Jared had heard of Mr. Thorndyke before either Jared or Thorndyke had moved to this city. His methods were more than a little suspicious. He had evaded being convicted of any crimes, yet Jared was sure he had amassed his wealth by using sketchy means. The fact that he chose to move here had always seemed odd to Jared, in a place with such a low crime rate, as any crime that was committed was sure to have a spotlight on it. But Thorndyke appeared to have mended his ways, at least on the surface, at least in the public eye. Jared figured if there was someone corrupt enough to kill kids in Memora and have the means to cover up in such a startling way, it would be Mr. Thorndyke. But you've got to have evidence. Without evidence, Your hypothesis has no grounding. Now, the rest of the group dedicated to catching the killer didn't really believe in his theory. Jared himself knew he didn't have much to back it up. It was a hunch, a conspiracy theory, if you will. But something inside him told him he was right. One member of the group was actually a mechanic that often went to inspect the machinery at Mr. Thorndyke's steelworks factory. He also didn't believe Jared's theory, but he also wasn't going to dismiss it either. So when Jared asked him for help, he gave him some pointers and pretended that Jared, or rather Thomas Vaines, was a fellow mechanic who recommended his services while he was out of town, quote unquote. Jared mused that he was going plenty far for a mere hunch. But with his fake ID in hand and the doors of the factory looming before him, he didn't have time to mull this over anymore. And so, under the gaze of being Thomas Vaines, the mechanic, he entered. Ooh. Hello, Mr. Vaines. Glad to see you have arrived. Finally arrived, that is. A man with an honest-looking face grinned and came to greet him. Oh, I'm not late, am I? Jared instinctively reached for the watch he always had hung around his neck and then hesitated. He had it hidden under his jacket specifically because it stuck out and he didn't want anyone to recognize him later. The worker started to laugh. No, forgive me, it's merely impatience on my part. We had to stop the equipment for the inspection and I'm anxious to get things flowing again. The worker gave another hearty laugh and then asked for his ID card. After verifying his identity, he started walking. Jared followed him into the main part of the building and along the metal walkways. I apologize if I'm impeding you from completing a deadline or quota. No, you good. We got to factor in maintenance in our plans. I'm anxious for this to get done for purely selfish reasons. So you can have an extra holiday, an extra day's worth of holiday, getting everything done as quickly as possible. I love my job. I love the process of making steel, mixing metal. In fact, even when I get home, I work with it. Not everyone has that luxury of both loving their job and doing the job itself. Really? Yep, I dabble in metal sculpture, but enough about me. Let's take a look at this. He gestured at a huge piece of equipment that Jared really hoped he wasn't going to walk to talk about in depth. Jared did his best to look like he was inspecting the machine, according to the instructions of the real mechanic. What? There's nothing wrong with it, is there? I'm not sure. Something looks a bit odd, but it could be nothing. Do you have the schematics for this machine? Of course, Jared already knew the answer to this question. Yeah, in the room in the back. Do you need to look at them? Yes, I just need to confirm something. Alright, follow me. Great. Jared thought as they walked toward the back, he was headed right where he needed to be. Hopefully everything will proceed according to plan. Now he just needs to get rid of a worker. Here we... Oh, almost forgot. Jared interrupted him and explained that their regular mechanic wants to know the serials off of some new equipment they got and asked if a worker could go and check so he could relay the information back to him. The worker agreed and left. Now Jared had to move quickly. He grabbed the schematics out of the filing cabinet and stuffed them into his pocket. Then he quickly went to look at the other documents. Receipts for purchases of various metals, chemicals. Chemicals? Jared drew a file out. There were some strange chemicals listed on there. A single invoice. High quantities. Ooh, this is looking suspect already. The most obvious exclamation was that they were buying supplies in bulk. However, Jared had done some research before coming to this factory, and he knew these chemicals weren't required for their usual production. Good bit of research there, actually. Always do your research before investigating something. It bugged him, but it wasn't what he was looking for. He put the file back and kept searching. He kept flickering through files until he saw one that contained a familiar name. The Nightingale Orphanage. Jared grabbed the file. Sure enough, a large donation had been sent to the orphanage shortly before the killing started. But what is in between that large donation and now? It wasn't enough to convict anybody, but it did prove his hypothesis. Thorndyke and the orphanage were connected somehow. Suddenly, the door started to open. Jared quickly folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. "Oh, sorry, I haven't been able to find the schematics yet." The lie he had prepared died out on his tongue when he saw who had walked into the room. It was Mr. Thorndyke himself. "Oh, good. I was hoping to catch you, Thomas Vinis. The mechanic, correct? There's something I want you to look at downstairs." At this point, the worker had returned and looked like the two of them were in puzzlement. "Hello, Mr. Thorndyke. Can't it wait a little longer? We've got to finish up this inspection." "Don't worry about it. It hasn't been too long since the equipment was last checked, and you haven't noted any problems, have you, Mr. Vinis?" No, but I..." "Excellent. Start it up again," he said, addressing the worker. The man merely shrugged his shoulders and nodded before leaving the room. Now that Mr. Thorndyke was standing close to him, Jared noticed he reeked of what he assumed must be expensive colonage, but to him smelled like decayed plants. He hid his displeasure behind a smile. "Actually, I have another appointment to get to." "It won't take long." Thorndyke turned and started walking, obviously expecting Jared to follow. With his heart racing, he stared at Mr. Thorndyke's back as they walked out of the room and down the hallway. Not good. Jared wasn't sure how he was going to get out of this one. Should he make some kind of excuse? Just run away? But Jared was also curious if there were answers to be had at the end of this. As he mulled over his options, they entered a connected building and descended down a flight of stairs into a basement level. Thorndyke pushed a button, making the door behind them slam shut. Jared tensed. He wasn't going to be able to go back that way on his own. This is definitely a trap. The basement itself was dimly lit. They passed by a room with an open door. Jared noticed there were lots of containers with various chemicals in them. The room Thorndyke did turn to enter was almost pitch black. However, you could make out a heavy wooden desk with what little light there was. As he entered the room, the scent of decayed plants intensified. "What did you want me to look at?" "It'll be here soon. The question is, did you find what you were looking for?" "From the moment you entered this building, I knew something was amiss." "Who are you working for, Jared Varden, Mr. Private Investigator? Or are you working on your own today? Regardless, you were quite brave to come here and I must applaud you. Your life is over now, you know." Thorndyke's smile was darkly amused. Jared steeled himself. "Hardly. There are people who knew I came to investigate you today. If I go missing now, it'll just prove you're involved with the silent killings." "Ah, so that's why you're here. I see. Well, I can tell you I'm not the only one who killed those children. Though I do know who did kill them." "Then tell me so I can go after them instead. I'll forget the threat you just made." "You think you can negotiate with me? I don't think you realize the position you're in. Also, I may not have killed those children, but I never said I wasn't involved." Anger surged inside of Jared. "You're not getting away with this." "You still don't get it, do you? It doesn't even matter. You killed a man yesterday." "What?" "Like I said, you killed a man. Body washed up on the shore of a river. Tragic. The police are looking for you now. You want to know who is behind the silent killings? As far as the police are concerned, it's you. The man you killed was an important witness to the most recent killings. You disposed of him to cover your tracks. How wicked. Yeah. At this point, all the evidence points to you being the serial killer. I made sure of that." Gosh. Going in too deep, don't you think? Jared clenched his teeth. Just how long had Thorndyke been planning this? False evidence. Even if that's true after what you did comes to light. I honestly don't care. They'll have to investigate, which means that they'll have to hold you. Which will make you a sitting duck, my friend. And as far as my reputation goes, that... He laughed a sinister laugh that chilled Giles to his bones. Oh dearie me. Doesn't really concern me any longer. I will soon have to cast my identity aside regardless. Something big is coming. Something huge. Life-changing. Alas! You aren't going to be around to witness it. It is rather funny you decided to drop by today. See, I've been watching you too, Jared Varden. The people here are so used to peace and harmony that it's made them blind. But you, oh, you've always kept such a keen eye on me. You've been a thorn in my side the whole time I've been here in Memora. I figured pinning the blame on you would be a perfect way to exact my revenge. What kind of revenge? But now that you're here, I could do something even better. Your efforts today haven't been in vain. You've amused me, and as such, you've earned the right to be a sacrifice. Yikes. The strange smell in the room suddenly exploded into something far more toxic. Jared held his hand to his nose, and then his eyes widened in horror as something emerged from the shadows. Let the hunt begin. Oh dear. It seems that things were not going well for Jared. Scene invasion. Oh dearie me. That's no good at all. Petals danced in the air above as Samara walked down the street with some other volunteers after a long day of work. Well, every little bit helps make the city a better place. I was thinking of coming again tomorrow. Do you have any suggestions of where help is needed most? Actually, I heard the healing garden over by Maple is having a bit of trouble. Something about flowers dying. I was going to head there myself, but I'm going to be busy at work after all. So if you have some time... Certainly. Thank you, Samara. Looks like it's going to rain soon, but I'd better hurry home. Well, I'll see you next Wednesday. Samara waved as the other volunteers left. She stood on the side of the street, and watched the crowd go by. She breathed in deeply the scent of flowers that pervaded Memora City and smiled. This was what she loved about Memora most, the sense of love and care that flowed through the place. You could feel it in every breath, every heart that wanders this city. She hoped this otherworldly peace could last forever, but oh no no no. Peace will certainly have a way of being broken. A flash of lightning arced across the sky. The people on the street below jumped in surprise and then laughter. Everyone started to hurry so they could escape from the coming rain. Only Samara remained standing in the street, frozen in place. Only she, looking up at the petals dancing in the air, had gotten a glimpse of what had really shown itself in the sky a moment before. A nightmare of sorts. She saw an electric hand, pale and sickly yellow, pound once at a barrier that enclosed Memora before faded away. All at once, Samara felt that fragile peace slipping away. With a heavy heart, she grabbed something out of a bag she had hoped never to have to use. With a push of a button, a signal was sent out all over Memora to everyone that had a device like hers, a call for a meeting. Ah, we're back to Jard again. Not Samara. I like the fact that the game is telling us which character we're on. Okay, scene Jace. Magnificent, isn't he? Jard hardly heard the words Thorndyke spoke. He was gazing into the darkness and slowly backing away as dripping flesh and hungry eyes started to glaze. Oh gosh. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. There was no other word to describe the thing that was walking past Thorndyke but monster. This is who you were looking for, right? The one who committed the silent killings. He's a good friend of mine. Now, I'm not so cruel as to completely leave you without a chance to escape. While you cannot return where you came from, there is another exit to this building you can find down here. In a sudden flash, it struck a jar. It was a minor hit, like a cat battling a mouse to make it run. The pain jolted him out of his frozen terror. Not the frozen terror, huh? Jard bolted out of the room as Mr. Thorndyke cackled. Run, run if you can, but he'll find you. There's just multiple options now. Jard ran for his life down dark hallways, his mind racing. What was that thing? How could it exist? Why was it working with Mr. Thorndyke? Could he escape it? Jard didn't know the layout of this part of the factory, and the monster most likely did. It was dark and winding, like a lair. Jard thought bitterly. He refused to die here without a fight, though. The chemicals. Maybe he could use that to hurt the monster. He quickly backtracked his way to the room he had seen the chemicals in. The monster's heavy footsteps startlingly close behind him. Jard forced to open a container and then hurled it straight at the monster's face. He heard it howl as it raced down the hallways. Yeah. The howl soon gave way to a cackling noise, and Jard's blood ran cold. No! It had bought him some time at least. Hadn't it? Jard soon came across an intersecting hallway. It was almost pitch black. Jard went left and prayed it wasn't a dead end. There were a lot of locked rooms down here. He hoped the exit wasn't in one of them. Yikes. Thorndyke could be lying about there being an exit down here, of course. Yep, giving us some peace of mind. A facade, as it will. He could hear the monster turning a corner behind him. Jard ran straight into a wall. He cursed and felt his way across the corner. It was so dark down here. He needed a way to hurt or divert the monster's attention, or he was done for. Just as he thought, but he felt hot breath on his neck. His instincts kicked in and he battered away at it. He realized it was one of the stringy parts of the monster's flesh and not the main body. But if it could reach him, then the body couldn't be far behind. Think! What could he do? In desperation, he grasped at a nearby doorknob. Miraculously, it wasn't locked. He ran into the room quickly and locked it behind him. There was an almost instant impact. The door bent inwards slightly. Yikes. It would be nice if... Well, it would be nice right now. Some sound effects. Jard huffed and looked around. There was a tiny bit of light in this room coming from a flickering dying light bulb. There was a bunch of random stuff in here. He wasn't sure what the space was supposed to be used for. He looked around for anything he could use. After a minute or so had passed, he heard the lock of the door click open. The monster entered and found a metal cabinet crashing down on its body, knocking it over. Jard climbed on top of the back of the cabinet and jumped over the monster. Yikes. Jard was honestly surprised that worked. He glanced back for a second to see that the monster was grinning and putting everything back where it was supposed to be. It was toying with him, wasn't it? Now Jard could feel a bit of anger rising up inside of him. It wanted to chase him. It wanted him to be scared, running for his life as long as possible. Jard gritted his teeth and ran to the end of this hallway and down another corner. Just how big was this place? It didn't matter. He saw a small metal spiral staircase with an exit sign hung near it, and he renewed his speed. He quickly climbed to the top and pushed on another metal door that also had an exit sign on it. The door opened and he stepped out into the streets. Yay! Or was it? Jared blinked in the sudden brightness. He was on the other side of a factory, he guessed. The building itself loomed behind him. He still had to get away, although he wondered most monsters in the fairy tales and stories he had heard hated light. Also, the area of the factory he had just been in was deliberately kept dark. Could a monster even follow him out here? Not that it stopped Jared from running away from a factory, but he did look back when he heard the factory door open. His heart sunk when he saw a monster step out into the open. It was moving a lot slower though. Whether it was injured by the shelves or weak against daylight, Jared didn't care. He tried to put as much distance between them as he could. It appeared to work. After running for several minutes, it got to the point where he hadn't seen the monster in a while. Soon the factory was far behind him and he walked down the streets again. Hey, this looks more familiar. Jared ended up in a shopping district with a lot of people around. He decided to try and join the crowd. He was getting too tired to run, and if the monster had a keen sense of smell, maybe all the people around would throw off his scent. Jared tried to slow his breathing. What was that monster? No, doesn't matter. He needed to figure out what Thorndyke was up to and make sure his family was alright. And he also needed to figure out how to clear his name. Jared spied some policemen walking through the crowd. He hated having to be wary of them now too. Something made the hairs on the back of Jared's neck prickle and he looked back. There was someone walking through the crowd. Yeah, a person who looked oddly familiar and filled Jared with dread, but he couldn't quite place why. Then he noted, oh, the man was wearing the same cloak the monster had on, and when he reached out his hands silently, bright white eyes fixed on Jared. Jared jerked forward out of his reach. He ended up knocking to someone and he said a quick apology as he pushed forward. The monster could turn into a human? Was there any way for him to escape it then? On the bright side, it was trying to blend into the crowd, which meant it didn't want to be detected. Do you think finding the police would be a good idea? Yeah, let's find the police. If it was a matter of him being behind bars or being eaten by this monster, Jared was much more willing to take the first option. Although he was concerned about Thorndyke's ominous mention of him being a sitting duck behind bars. But Jared couldn't think of anywhere else he would be safe from this thing. Jared quickly ran through the crowd, no longer worried about keeping up appearances. The monster's eyebrows quirked up, but it kept up its pursuit. That is, until Jared flagged down the policeman. For the first time, the smile of the monster's face wavered. It silently sunk back into the crowd, disappearing from view. Maybe it wanted to deal with him personally. Is something wrong? There's someone chasing me. Wait, he's Jared Varden. Jared was quickly... Damn it. I knew that was a rubbish option. Jared was quickly arrested. Many people stopped and watched in confusion, questions, and rumours spreading like wildfire. Jared just hoped he wasn't playing right into Thorndyke's hands. Yeah, he was. Samara again. Scene corruption. Yeah, I knew that the running option would have been better. Samara walked down the cloudy streets with a sense of urgency. Ooh, she quickly made her way to the statue of a white hand. In its palm, actual flowers grew and trailed down between the fingers and near the wrist. There were many of these statues throughout Memora. Samara held up her device, which emitted a white light. What exactly is this device anyways? The flower-covered stone parted to allow entry. She looked up once more to the cloudy sky before descending down the steps. Lovely. At the bottom below the streets of Memora was a secret place. A place where guardians gathered. Oh no, not the word guardians. There, she changed into her uniform and donned a band decorated with red flowers. And she waited for the others to arrive. The first to appear was a friend of hers, Warren. Hello, Warren. I'm glad you're here. Are you okay? What happened? Get ready first, I have dark news to share with everyone. Over the course of the next half an hour, several other guardians who mostly lived mundane lives scattered throughout the city gathered and donned their uniforms. They all met in a meeting room, Samara addressed them. Nightmare had made his move. Samara explained to the group of guardians of what she saw in the sky earlier. We need to take immediate action. If he can manifest matter again, that is a problem. But you said he wasn't able to break the barrier, right? Only hit it once? Yes, but that's not the issue. The hand hit the barrier from the inside. There was a moment of stunned silence. You mean to say he's already here? And trying to break the barrier? You're right, we need to figure out what's going on here. And fast. So, is it time? We, the Guardians of Memora, must make ourselves known. We have to make sure the other Guardians who did not attend know the situation. I'll spread the news. And with that, everyone started to spread into groups. It's a shame it has come to this. If we had done a better job, we might have been able to stop this invasion before anyone knew what was happening. It can't be helped. Our enemy is a sly one, and he has hungered for the destruction of the city for centuries. We don't have time for half measures. I'm going to inform the police. What about you? The healing gardens. I'm going to check on the west one by Maple Street. Why? When I came back from volunteering, one of the women mentioned that the flowers there were dying. I have a bad feeling about it. Sounds like a plan. Be safe. You as well. When Samara emerged from their meeting place, she noticed it had started to drizzle. She idle wondered if she should grab an umbrella somewhere, then scoffled. Rain didn't matter right now. She was a guardian and she was needed. Hell yeah. So if there was one perk of going to the gardens as her first duty as a guardian, it was that she didn't need to explain herself. The overseer of all the healing gardens was a guardian himself. He was of an older generation, too old to fight. But he was a steadfast soul and wants to keep contributing as long as he was able. Samara had written off his absence at the meeting as him being too far away to attend, or, due to the nature of his work, too busy. But he was here, and Samara could guess why. He didn't seem surprised to see her. Dressed in guardian gear, he had a solemn look on his face as he greeted her. So, what has happened here? Some kind of corruption. Apparently has been spreading for the last 2 days. Careful where you step. Its tendrils are hidden. The two of them walked further into the garden. Samara noted the sick people lying in the gardens and their loved ones that were still present, albeit at a distance. This was supposed to be a place of healing, a place of hope, where Eislyn's light might shine on those too sick to be healed elsewhere. What a terrible thing for a place such as this to be corrupted. Maybe Eislyn is the barrier itself, keeping everyone in the inside safe, but if something managed to break the barrier, then Eislyn actually turns into the opposite entity. Is it safe for this place to still function as a healing garden? Shouldn't you close it down? I wish that I could. We are not accepting new patients, but those that came here before we realize what happened cannot leave. Why not? When the corruption made its way into the patients' bodies, they have become even more violently ill than when they came. So much that moving them would probably kill them. I would not look too closely, my dear. It is an awful mess to see this place of healing perverted so. He shook his head in sorrow. The entrance to the garden remains untainted. We hope that they can heal enough to be taken somewhere else before the corruption takes over completely. I pray that it will be so, and I hope more that I can end this corruption here and now. As do I. I wish I'd seen all of this earlier. My gardeners believe it to be a natural sort of rot. I can't blame them, as none of them know of NaNoRenO. I am glad you came. I noticed a signal earlier, just before I arrived at this garden. I was about to send a message. How did you know to come here? One of my fellow community volunteers mentioned that flowers were dying here. I was going to come back tomorrow regardless, but in light of what just happened, I had a hunch it was no coincidence. I see. In the area where they were walking, it was indeed hard to tell the difference between where the corruption was and was not. But the area ahead looked like a cave of decaying leaves and flowers. The rain stirred up an awful smell. One of the gardeners who was watching the area came up to them. Please be careful. We believe the rot to be toxic. I understand, and I will be. You're not thinking of going in there? The Guardian put a hand on the shoulder of the gardener. Samara heard the Guardian begin to explain the truth of the situation to the gardener, but she stopped listening as she approached the deformed part of the garden. Yikes. All noise but the sound of the rain hitting and dripping down the crackling leaves and petals seemed to fade away. She blinked slowly, sensing a menacing and living evil, and walked forward. So we've got two different sides of the story, the instigator and what is outside the factory, that is still the instigation itself. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she readied her weapon, a light bearer. If there was a core or something that the plants were feeding off of, she would incinerate it. But as the darkness and silence surrounded her, she started to wonder if such a thing exists. If the enemy had already invaded, could it have had enough time to introduce a corruption of this scale to the plants of this garden without some kind of a device? She hoped not. Burning each individual plant would be time-consuming, and possibly even pointless if the corruption spread further than she was able to cleanse it, like the nightmare world in Atelier Riser. A tinge of fear shot through her. What if the Guardians were already too late? What if the invasion, the corruption had gone unnoted for long enough already that its roots had spread throughout the whole city, entangled, clutching it at the heart and soul of the city so tightly that nothing could break it? She narrowed her eyes and gripped her weapon tighter. The darkness seemed to pulsate around her. Were the plants merely blowing in the stormy wind, or was there a dark intelligence behind them, watching her? This feeling of dread seeping inside of her. Was this a trap? She shouted as she was tugged into an endless expanse of black emptiness. Yeah. Oh. Samara's eyes widened as she floated through dark space. Was this real? Or a nightmare? Did she pass out? What was going on? All around her she could feel a million tiny eyes watching her. She shivered. It's an illusion. It must be. Samara closed her eyes and tried to concentrate. It didn't help. Eyes opened or closed. There was only endless emptiness. The understanding that things were watching her in the dark, and something was coming closer. Samara's breath quickened as she sensed something huge approaching. She couldn't see it or hear it, but she knew it was there, coming closer, slowly and maddeningly approaching. This was it. It was over. It had to be the NaNoRenO himself. What else could be so big, large enough to fill the whole city with his presence, every breath evaporating everything good and whole? She gritted her teeth. She wanted to swing wildly, to scream. The terror was overwhelming. But through it all, the steel of her mind told her that she had to stay strong. Even with the crazed thoughts racing through her head, she focused on one thought and one thought only. Concentrate. Gather all your strength into your light bearer. She swung out of the darkness and released a beacon of light. And there she was back. There were no screams, no purging fire rage. Everything was just instantly and discordantly back to normal. Her feet planted firmly on the ground. Memora grasped and bent to catch her breath. It had felt so real. So that was the power of not more. She had heard of these illusions, trained herself to escape them, but she hadn't even come close to imagining how terrifying they really were. But the fact that they could ensnare someone within Memora, a guardian no less, did not bode well. She stood up and looked around. The corruption was still there, but seemed to be slowly fading away. She must have destroyed the source without seeing what it was. Quickly making her way out of the dark parts of the garden, she approached her fellow guardian. I think it's over now. Thank goodness. I had to go and see how the other guardians are doing. Please keep an eye on this place and tell me if the corruption fades or recovers. Of course. Hopefully fades, as in the corruption. Warren!